is Rosemary Stones and I'm the editor of Books for Keeps, the UK's leading children's literature review journal, which recently celebrated its 30th birthday. Tonight, Books for Keeps is at Foyle's Bookshop on Charing Cross Road in London for the launch of a new collection of short stories for teenagers called Losing It. And yes, we are talking about teenagers losing or wanting to lose their virginity. Losing It is published by Anderson Press and edited by Keith Gray, and it contains 8 short stories by some of the most popular and formidable talents writing for children today. So, what's new and different about Losing It?
I like the tension between, I really like the tension between what teenagers say amongst themselves when there's not an adult around and what they say in front of adults, and it's that eternal conundrum of, if you wrote what teenagers actually said, they wouldn't be able to read it because it would be too adult for them. So it's this paradox, and I really like that idea of showing how they really would talk, but censoring it in a funny way. And I thought that's a funny idea with the black boxes of censoring the bad language and so on. But I thought it'd be even funnier if they knew that it was going on, and the characters are aware that the black boxes are there, and which makes them swear even more behind black boxes, because once something's forbidden, you want to do it even more. So that was sort of my big starting point, was trying to find a fun way for me to explore the tension of what teenagers are like when they're alone and when they're with adults. I think it's a really interesting idea, really interesting concept to live as a teenager like that, because I remember living my life that way.
My main goal when writing is to entertain. So I don't see it as an educative process. I don't want to preach. I don't feel there necessarily has to be a moral message. Contraception and safe sex, they're really massively important issues. So personally, I like to explore that area of things. And in this particular story, the way I've done that is actually not particularly through talking about condoms or STIs, but actually through showing a girl going through the experience of wondering, does she really want to have sex for the first time right here, right now? So that aspect of the whole thing, rather than specifically contraception or safe sex, was what I particularly wanted to focus on with this story.
It's basically a story about a girl whose aunt tells her quite a horrific story about her family's past, and I wanted to write about the whole concept of sort of losing your virginity and family honour, but from a very sort of traditionally sort of northern Indian perspective, coming from that background myself. So it's about how there's a big cultural difference in losing your virginity if you're a British female who's white, as opposed to a British female who's from a British Asian background, and I wanted to kind of show the similarities.
My story scoring is kind of an introduction to the rest of the stories. There's a few questions asked. It's a will he, won't he, should he, shouldn't he kind of story, and it talks a little bit about the myths that surround losing your virginity and sex. And so I maybe cheated a little bit. I threw those questions out there in my story, knowing that the following stories were maybe going to answer one or two of them for the rest of the readers. So my story was, it was an introduction to the rest of the anthology. And I wanted to open it on the right foot. I wanted to open it with a little bit of humour, with a little bit of thoughtfulness, and purposely with no sex. That was the way I wanted to open the anthology, in that way, so that everybody else could follow on.
The more I did research in Victorian times, in the 19th century, the more dire I found was the role of the poor. No welfare state. I mean, if a woman was completely broke, there were no options except to sell her body if she could.
I also think that there are more things that boys and girls have in common than they actually have apart. All the important things about relationships are just as relevant to boys and girls, but yeah, there are definitely some differences in the makeup, I think, of both sexes.
If there's one thing I would say is, to them is, don't do it unless you really want to. Don't get pressured into it by anyone, because this is what can happen.
Just to remind you, Losing It is published by Anderson Press, and you can read lots about the 8 contributors to the collection on the Books for Keeps website. For example, our Authorgraph interviews feature Mary Hooper, Anne Fine and Melvin Burgess, and there are reviews on the site of books by all 8 contributors to Losing It.